Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Ancestral Eyes, episode 14. And tonight's guest is my longtime friend. She is a high priestess of a British tradition. She's a witch. Yes, a bona fide witch, like me. Anyway, so tonight we're going to break a little bit. I'm going to say hello, first of all, to Karen.
Hello, Teresa. Hello, Jean Jerome. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming on. I really do. And good evening to Jean Jerome. So Jean Jerome, I'm going to let you introduce the piece of music that we just heard, as well as the intro to Karen, because I'm having technical difficulties at my end.
No problem. First,
take it away, Jean Jerome.
Welcome, Karen. It's very nice to have you on the show. Many blessings to all our audience, and hope everybody's having a good Friday night. Today we have a song from an artist called Adrian von Ziegler, and he is basically on Patreon under Adrian von Ziegler. Seems to be a very good artist, and I definitely love the instrumentation and the creativity of that. I thought it was an appropriate theme for tonight's show.
Something Celtic.
Yeah, something Celtic, a little bit of a Celtic vibe. And I wanted to, again, welcome Karen. Welcome again. Great to be with my co-host, Teresa, on episode 14. And it's going to be a wonderful show. So without further ado, Karen Dale is an award-winning author of the best-selling series, The Chosen Chronicles, which can be found on Amazon under Kindle. And she's a Wiccan high priestess of the Gardnerian Witchcraft tradition. With her husband, she has been running a coven for over 20 years. So she's really an established community member in this tradition and has several daughter covens across Canada. She's also the co-founder and co-hostess for the Toronto Pagan Pub Moot, which has been running for how long, Karen?
Almost 25 years.
25 years, is it? Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Yeah, almost 25 years.
So I'm not kidding when I say she's definitely been a part of the community for quite some time. And you can find, again, more information about the Toronto Pagan Pub Moot at Toronto Pagan Pub Moot on Facebook. And it's been running since 1996. That's right. When she's not running her coven on the moot, she can be found spending time with her husband, Evan, their son, and their 5 cats.
Yeah.
Oh, you cat people. You cat people, you. I don't know anybody who has any cats. Must be a witchy thing.
Could be, maybe.
Maybe. We used to have 6, now we have 5, but who knows? We might end up with 6 again. You never know.
Oh my goodness. So I'm gonna tend a little bit to the technical details. So back over to you, Teresa.
Okay, thank you very much, Jean Jerome. You're good at intros. Maybe I should get you to do them more often. No, I won't. I'm kidding. Just kidding. Anyway, so yes. Okay, so I'm going to dive into the questions. That's what I like to do. Get right down to the, hey, hi, Jay. She's saying, hi, Karen. Hi, Teresa. Hi, Jean Jerome. Jay's one of our regular watchers of the show. So welcome, Jay. And like I said, I'm going to dive into the questions, okay, because Karen and I share a witch traditional lineage. And so I'm going to start with my first question. So Karen, I'm going to ask you, how did you come upon your spiritual path, and could you describe your journey?
I think so. I would say the journey is the discovery. And my journey started when I was 16 years old in high school, which is very common for a lot of people to kind of check out and test out their spirituality and the like.
Yep.
But so when I was 16, I was introduced to the occult and witchcraft and Wicca, and through a friend in high school. And from there, I was like, as a teenager, there's not much you can do but learn and read as much as I could way back then. And as time progressed, when I got into university, I was then introduced to some people who were involved with the Wiccan Church of Canada, which is here in Toronto. They have temples here in Toronto, Hamilton, Windsor, and I think in New Brunswick, but don't quote me on that. And so I became involved with them and their particular tradition of Wicca, which is the Odyssean tradition. But I found that I wanted something even more traditional, something with lineage and stuff like that spoke to me. And I ended up finding teachers in Ottawa, and this is before the internet. And so there was a lot of letter writing back and forth and me traveling back and forth to Ottawa quite often. And I got my first degree with them in Wicca, in witchcraft. And then they asked me to start training others. And that's how I ended up meeting Teresa. And so I was kind of like a facilitator for her to learn more about Wicca and the like. And after a period of time, I realized that I needed to take some time for myself and went off on my own. And after a period of time, I wanted to delve even deeper into my Gardnerian Wiccan spirituality. And through friends, I again, not necessarily over the internet so much, like some emails and stuff, I was introduced to my high priestess, Zena Davies, who lived in Swansea, Wales. Yeah, she was in Wales, in the UK. And we clicked right away. Funny enough, she actually had signs and visits from her initiator saying that somebody from Canada was going to connect with her, and eventually that's how it happened. And what was another part of how we connected is that the maiden of her coven, her maiden of the coven and I had been pen pals for a really long time, but I didn't know Zena. I didn't know Zena, and so when it came to the head that I was talking to Zena and then I was talking to her and writing to her. And then finally I said, yeah, I'm coming to Wales because I'm going, going to be meeting all these people and be getting my second degree with her and stuff like that. Named her and she just flipped out because that was her high priestess. That was the coven I was being initiated into. And so it was just
we are so secretive, aren't we? We witches, we will not say a thing.
Sometimes, yeah. So and it was so my husband and I went over to Wales and I was given my second degree. And my husband was given his first. Then came back to Toronto after spending a wonderful week with her. And then a couple of years later, we brought her over to Toronto. She had never left the UK except to go to Iceland and to Europe. But so this was her first time leaving that side of the world. And we brought her over here, and that's when she elevated up into third, and I was elevated to third degree in Wicca. And so that's the journey. But the journey doesn't stop. The exploration doesn't stop. It just keeps going, expanding, and it's wonderful.
It really does. I think, just when you think you've reached a certain plateau or something happens or you feel like you're stuck or something like this, just life happens, spirits overtake. That's it. Not overtake, you know what I mean? The spirits come You're led. Okay. Jean Jerome, don't look at me like that.
You're led. The gods will lead you to where you need to be, when you need to be, for what you need to learn at that time.
Absolutely.
And
Thank
I
you,
really,
Karen.
and I really
Teresa,
believe
stay away
that.
from those walls.
He'll never let me live that down. Anyway, sorry, Karen. Private
That's
joke.
okay.
Inside joke, Karen. Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Karen. Yes, yes,
Nope.
yes. Thank you so much. And I remember these stories and I remember you telling me, but it's always nice when you get to hear them all over again and sort of in a quick sequence, in a quick summary, instead of interjecting with other conversation and stuff, so you kind of lose that train of thought or that train of conversation. So thank you so much, Karen, for saying that. Yes. And that was so many years ago, wasn't it?
Oh my God. Yeah,
Oh,
I'm hiding my gray
Lord.
hairs under this. So there you go.
I have all of mine, right?
Yeah,
So anyway.
it's COVID hair, so we're not going there.
Okay, yours is COVID hair. Mine is I wanted it like this and I'm keeping it
Okay.
like this. Anyway, whatever. So, okay, so my second question is, now I know you've participated in the society, or you represented the pagan society at the World Conference, the World Religion Conferences.
Okay.
So before we
Yeah,
go
so
with
let
any,
me just correct you on that. So
okay, sorry.
this was at the Parliament of World Religions in November of
Sorry.
2018, and I was the one who kind of was the hostess for the pagan meet and greet space at the Parliament. That was my job there, and but there was lots of other people who did many different things, ran talks, did so much other stuff. The person who really did the most for the pagans at the Parliament of World Religions was Catherine Starr, and frankly, I would not have been the one to help organize and host that the pagan meet and greet section if it wasn't for Catherine Starr.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yes, Catherine Starr. I think I do know her, and I think I've met her. So, yeah. Well, and of course, with something that big on that scale, of course, you would need some help, definitely.
Oh, yeah.
But thank you for correcting me. I obviously I wrote it down wrong when we were having our conversations. But what I wanted to do was, because you were the representative, you and Catherine, I'm sure you got asked this 1,001 times, but could you give us the definition of what a witch is, what a Wiccan is, and what a pagan is?
Oh, okay. All right.
No
So,
pressure.
Start with the witch.
No
yeah,
Start
well,
with the witch.
actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the term pagan.
Perfect. Take it
Because
away.
it builds from there. So when I was at the Parliament of World Religions, I had an opportunity to talk to many different people from many different religions, and I had to come up with an all-encompassing definition to
Yes.
describe the massive diversity of paganism to people who wouldn't necessarily understand that level of diversity that paganism includes. So I came up with this definition, right or wrong, but it seemed to help non-pagans, especially people who were practicing monotheists, to understand where we were coming from. So my definition that I used then, and I often use it now still, is paganism or neo-paganism is the reconstruction or the reemergence of pre-monotheistic European religions. So, for example, Celtic reconstructionists are Celtic pagans and the like. There's the term heathens to describe people who are reconstructing Nordic and Norse paganism. And they use the term heathenry. So so those are examples of Reconstructionism. For reemergence, we're talking about maybe Hellenic paganism from Greece,
Right.
which has never
Right.
gone away. It just went underground
Right.
for a long time, and it's
Absolutely.
now reemerging. So
Right.
it's a very broad spectrum term. It's a huge umbrella term, and that kind of helps people understand that it's either reemergence of something that's always been there, or it's a reconstruction of something that has been gone for a long time, or it might be a combination of both.
Yes.
And that's where witchcraft, in terms of British witchcraft, falls into. It's more of a reemergence and reconstruction of
Yes.
folklore and folk practices and folk religions of specifically the British Isles and maybe some parts of Europe as well. So that's where we get. So that's witchcraft, and Wicca comes from that as more of a specific form of witchcraft that has been reconstructed from old and reemerged from that a particular area and pocket based upon
Right.
so
It's a tradition onto itself, if you want to look at it that way.
Exactly.
So
yeah, so if you want to think about it this way, paganism is the umbrella. Witchcraft is all those spines that keep the umbrella open.
Yes.
And then Wicca is one of those spines.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a really good definition. Kudos to you for coming up with that. I like that.
Thank you.
Definitely. So then it leads me to my third question. Very nicely into, could you give us a historical context of the craft in the sense of geography and people, and you know, we can mention our tradition, our lineage in that sense, and who are the movers and the shakers in our lineage and our tradition. So I'll let you take that over.
Okay.
Karen.
So, I mean, the history of Wicca, and I'm going to be using Wicca specifically because witchcraft is so diverse in itself that I can't really speak so much. So, but I'm going to use Wicca in terms of this particular type of witchcraft. And so has it been around for a really long time? Yes. Has it been in the form that we have come to learn it to be? No. There was a gentleman by the name of Gerald Gardner. He was a British citizen. He, through his experience of working and managing plantations in Malaysia, he was introduced to a lot of those pagan practices and beliefs of the indigenous people there. And as he journeyed back home to the UK, he was also a Mason. And then when he landed back into the UK, he became involved with a Rosicrucian theatrical group near his home, and through them was introduced to a local witches' coven, and was eventually initiated. And from there, he realized that because for him everybody was old. He was an older man at that point, but all the other people were, in his mind, were old, and he was afraid that this was going to die out. So he tweaked things. He brought things in. This is where the reconstruction comes from the reemergence of stuff that he was involved with through his own experiences within Masonry and different aspects of ceremonial magic groups and connections within the occult communities in the UK at that time. And through that, he coalesced all that information and created what we know today to be Wicca. And in his books, he even states these issues, and that what he has given us is skeleton to fill in the blanks for ourselves. So Wicca is not specific. Yes, there are specific traditions within Wicca. There's a picture of Gerald Gardner right there, and he.
Yeah.
So he kind of broke the mold. He broke some I would say old ways of thinking about witchcraft and Wicca, and he brought the term Wicca into the modern age, and really this is where we get Gardnerian Wicca from, and from Gardnerian Wicca we have Alexandrian Wicca, and then from there lots of other Wicca. And frankly, and people may agree or disagree with me, but I firmly believe that if it wasn't for Gerald Gardner, we wouldn't, and his influence through his books and his teachings and his writing and through his interviews and stuff, we wouldn't even have paganism in the world right now, in the terms of like the Wiccan Church of Canada and people just practicing on their own. We wouldn't have publishers like Llewellyn producing books on, so people who can't find a coven to work with can at least have some general information and be able to practice on their own. So if it wasn't for him, everybody would still be practicing their monotheistic religions for the most part, but not everybody. But I'm just saying, generally for the most part.
Right. No, and I agree. We have to remember too that at that time England was still under the, well, I wouldn't say the rule, but witchcraft was still considered a crime up until 1950. So
yeah, but late 1950s. I think it's 1958, but don't quote me on that. My brain's not 100% working today. But
yeah, I thought it was earlier, but whatever. I mean, the point is that he came out of the closet, so to speak. And once he did, what was his first book? Because that was the one that sort of broke the mold, that kind of threw the doors open for all of this to sort of,
let's see here. You're making me turn around and look at my books. Okay. All right. So Gerald Gardner, before he found Wicca and before he was initiated and stuff like that, he wrote a book called The Goddess Arrives, I believe. And I don't know where my copy is, but I have it. And so that was just basically a fictional book that he wrote. And I think he was more or less kind of indie published or self-published at that time. And it wasn't until later that clearly he was attracted to the feminine aspect of divinity even before he found and was involved within a witchcraft coven in England. And so once he became initiated in 1939, he produced what I would call, again, an independent book, a fictional book, called High Magic's Aid. I will post it up here. I have a copy.
That's the book.
And it's a fictional book, but there's enough information in it that kind of got him into trouble in terms of ceremonial magic and witchcraft and stuff. I read it and I loved it. It was a great read. But he wrote it as fiction. And then when the Witchcraft Act was repealed, he wrote 2 books that were not fiction and were about witchcraft. And the 2 books were, I'll put this up here, Witchcraft Today and The Meaning of Witchcraft. So
that one I don't know.
So these are the 2 books that he published as, here you go. This is information that, yes, witches are here. Witches have always been here. This is what we believe. This is some of the why we believe and the like, and trying to deal with aspects that might be considered incorrect by mainstream ideology about witches. So he wrote these books. and went public, and when he went public, there was a lot of flack he received, but at the same time, it was probably one of the best things that he could have done, is make it public so that people realize, who were disenchanted with general monotheism and felt that their heart meant that there was something more out there than just one giant male deity with a bit like that looks like Gandalf in the sky, telling us how good or punishing us when we're bad. And so I think that really allowed a lot of people to
good analogy.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people were found that, wait a second, this is where I'm supposed to be. And then from there, it just kind of exploded through his initiation of many people, and men and women. And that's where we get the different Gardnerian lines, is through the different high priestesses he worked with at that time. Yeah.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about what you had mentioned in regards to when the Witchcraft Act was repealed. Was there one incident that, kind of cracked that whole thing open, and why did it happen? Okay. Because my understanding, like I wanted to acknowledge what Ken, one of our former guests, and is tuning in tonight, said he believes that Gardner and Crowley knew one another and there was an influence. So at that time of Gardner, his I would say his colleagues, for the lack of a better phrase, is this. Thank you. Sybil Leek. There was Sybil Leek. There were a number of other people that were his contemporaries.
Correct.
So do you remember, Karen, was there any one thing that cracked that open? Because I remember when I was, when I was 13 or 16, I think I was 16 when I got the book. Yes, I was 16. Sybil Leek's book. Okay. Yeah. And to me, I was like, wow, that's exactly what I thought witchcraft was all about. There was no sense of anything. So can you just kind of, what do you think is what I'm asking?
So, one of the main reasons why the Witchcraft Act was repealed was because they felt that at that time, they felt that that was a stupid law, that there was no such thing as witches. And why should we have it on the book as a treasonable offense when there's no witches? So they got rid of it, and then the witches went, aha, we can come out. And so Gerald Gardner came out, wrote his books, and started interviewing and stuff like that. And other witches were like, wait a second, you're not the only one here, dude. There's other people who've been practicing forms of witchcraft, not necessarily Wicca, but witchcraft, in Europe and in British Isles. And and when you have the fear of being prosecuted as a traitor to the crown for being a witch, that getting removed, and you don't have to worry about your neck being strung up. And you have somebody else who opened the door to allow saying, hi, witches are here. Then the other witches go, wait a second, we're here too, and we're offering other points of view in regards to this. And which is great, which is absolutely wonderful. And there are many people who are downline from Sybil Leek, and they're wonderful people, and they have their own covens, they have their own ways of doing things, and there's many different other traditions. Alex Sanders claimed in the book King of the Witches that he was initiated by his grandmother. As to whether or not that's true or not, it's a moot point. The fact of the matter is that his practice is very similar, almost identical in some aspects to Gardnerian Wicca. But you also have many different other traditions and practices that have come out of Europe, and specifically the UK, in terms of witchcraft. And that it's not just Gerald Gardner. It's just that he had experience with one aspect. Now, in regards to Crowley, as to whether or not he ever met Crowley, if I remember correctly from what Philip Heselton wrote in his book, in the biography of Gerald Gardner called Witchfather, I don't recall him saying that Gerald ever met Crowley. But I could be wrong. But they did. There were correspondences. There was, I think, mutual respect, and a high priest and high priestess that Gerald had initiated were also friends or associates with Crowley as well. As to whether or not such influences of Aleister Crowley's practice of thelema, influenced Wicca, I think there might have been a little bit of influence, but you have to understand that the occult community back then was quite small, and most people knew.
They were all contemporaries of one another. I mean, Crowley at the time, if I'm not mistaken, he started up the OTO, right?
Yeah.
The Order of the
Order Temporis Orientalis, or something like that. I'm not a ceremonialist, so I could be getting all of this wrong. But the fact is that people back then who were involved in witchcraft or ceremonial magic often knew each other or knew of each other. So it wasn't really a 6 degree of separation. It would be more like a 2 degrees of separation or 1 degree.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
They were borrowing from each other back and forth and back and forth. There were notes that were traded and open, right, between them.
So I don't know.
The other person.
Yeah, I don't know about the notes or anything like that. Yeah. See, I don't know about the notes or anything. I just know that there was information.
Okay, I'm just using that figuratively. What comes to mind was I thought there was some sort of controversy at the time with Sybil Leek, and I think this is what sort of heightened the whole situation because she was named. She came out on a talk show or something and said that she was a witch or whatever, and this prompted people to get into an uproar and upset over the whole situation. And then someone had mentioned that it was illegal to be a witch, and I think that this point is what the turning point was. I don't know. I came across something that there was reference to this because, of course, like I said, my first book was Sybil Leek and The Diary of a Witch. Thank you, Jay Sword, for that. Now, at the same time, what we have is, and I'm going to go back to naming some of our lineage, the names that that we're allowed to talk about because they are deceased, right? Because we as witches keep things very secret and very private, right? Right. So taking back Margaret Murray, and she was an occultist, if I'm not mistaken. And then there were other people that, again, contemporaries of Gardner. There was Margaret Murray. She was referred to, I think you had told me, we were talking about her as the grandmother of witchcraft in that sense, because she's
No, you're getting confused. So
okay, sorry.
Margaret Murray,
take it away, Karen.
Yeah. So I was
take it from there.
Just seeing if I have the book behind me. But Margaret Murray was an anthropologist, and she wrote a book about the god of the witches, which influenced Gerald Gardner.
Yes.
Charles Leland wrote Aradia, the Gospels of Aradia, which these books were published around the turn of the 19th century, like from the 1900s. So I'm not exactly sure of the exact dates, and to go through my whole entire library to find them, I'm not going to waste everybody's time doing that.
No.
But so there was a lot of writings that was going on around that time. A lot of spiritualist movements, the rise of ceremonial magic and the like. I think whom you're getting confused with is with Doreen Valiente, who is considered the grandmother of Wicca or witchcraft, because she was initiated by Gerald Gardner, and when he went public, she backed away from him and she went off to do her own thing, which is absolutely wonderful. And she actually gave us a lot of the liturgy that we see in books today. The most prominent one that we can say is the poetic and the prose versions of the Charge of the Goddess. So those are attributed to her. Yeah, she's the one who wrote those. She's also wrote many other things as well. She was a wonderful poetess, and so she helped fill in a lot of those spaces with her writings. Yep, there she is, when she was much younger. And so she filled in a lot of pieces and stuff that Gerald Gardner didn't have. And I think that helped really round out Wicca for a lot of terms of goddess worship and bringing more of an egalitarian perspective of divinity as both male and female. So that it's not just like one's above the other or anything, one's lesser than the other. It's that it's more egalitarian, but the goddess is very preeminent for many people. And that's usually the goddess is what draws people into Wicca in the first place.
Right, especially women. And so Doreen Valiente, given credit to writing the whole liturgy basically of modern Wicca, she herself was already an initiated witch, and I know that Gardner and all of them lay claim to the New Forest Coven. Can you give us a little bit about that, Karen? A little bit of history on that.
I wish, there's the New Forest Coven is the area. So the New Forest is in a particular place in the south of England. And there's many little towns around there, and that's kind of where where Gerald lived, and that's where he found the Rosicrucian theatrical troupe that he became involved with, and through them met particular individuals who were witches and then became initiated. Is most commonly referred to that particular coven as the New Forest Coven because of its closeness to the New Forest in England. Philip Heselton is a masterful researcher, and he has a new book coming out called In Search of the New Forest Coven. And I think it would be best to wait to read that book before we can make any comments in terms of the New Forest Coven, because Philip Heselton is fantastic, and I can't wait to get my signed hardcover copy of it coming out this fall. So,
and you met him.
Is there? Oh yeah, we're friends.
Yeah, you actually met Philip Heselton. Yep. I would love to talk to him. I think it'd be fantastic. What do you think, Jean-Jerome? We should have him on the show one time and talk about the history of witchcraft.
Absolutely.
Yep. So, I mean, you can contact him. I mean, he's a wonderful person. His research is meticulous. His writing is clear and wonderful. And
I would definitely get one of his books. I would definitely get his book.
Yeah.
His books.
Yeah. So, I mean, he's written, so for if you want to read anything definitive as to the history of these people and these situations, Philip Heselton's books are the way to go, honestly.
Perfect.
Because he spends years and years, and somebody should give Philip a honorary PhD in anthropology or something or other for his works, honestly, in my opinion. Yeah, because he's done so much for our history. Yes.
No, and exactly, and that's why I would like to read one of his books. Definitely, he's going to be on my list. So, thank you, Karen, for going into that, and what I want to do is go into now given the history and given what we know, okay, thank you.
There's Philip.
All
He's
right.
a sweet
Thank
guy.
you,
He
Jean
really is.
Jerome. There's Philip. Cool. All right. He looks a little like Gerald Gardner himself. It's that wild, crazy white hair, you know. Must be all the moisture in the UK, you know, and the weather, right? You know, it just makes
I don't know.
people with natural curly hair go crazy or something, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so okay, so given the history, and we now have a little better understanding of, you know, the differences, or
But
you know,
before we go there, something which is it was mentioned a couple of
something.
times, and I think for the audience, people that are listening or tuning in, especially when they look at you know, other belief systems in terms of, you know, Ifa, Orisha, West African indigenous belief systems, like Gardner, Doreen Valiente, this gentleman, Mr. Heselton, or Philip Heselton. There was mention that again they gave a renaissance, or like basically could be considered like the people that rescue, or at least get Wicca to be known and to rescue like knowledge and information that had been lost.
Rescue traditional beliefs
But
of
but but I
the
think
UK.
that one question people will have is, and most of them will ask, is what were their main sources? Like, in other words, how, when you piece something together, right, and you bring it together to try to recreate it in terms of, or give it a renaissance, you need to have, you know, fountains of information or sources of information. For instance, if we do a compare in West Africa, you have hundreds of years, almost a millennium of oral traditions being passed in terms of actual practice, almost uninterrupted, right? And then with the slave Holocaust, those traditions were brought over with the slaves into the diaspora. But in the case of these, you know, pioneers, or however term we want to, or fathers and mothers of this faith, what would you say, Karen, were the sources? Like, would they go into the countryside? Would they go into, you know, old libraries to try to rescue, you know, documents and all that may have been in, you know, major libraries, or museums, or you know, how does that, from what you know, how did that work of salvaging or pulling all this information together come to pass?
So a lot of it was from oral tradition.
Yes,
A lot of it was passed down through oral tradition that goes back a really long time. When I was in Wales, I met and had a friend who was a Gwython, which is Welsh witch, and his family and his practices were all oral and were passed down through his family for centuries. So I mean, it's there. And Gardner, I'm sure, between his own research in terms of research with and experiences within ceremonial magic, and then his initiation and experiences and education within the coven, and then talking with other people who were involved with their own covens and witches, with groups and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of oral tradition, and
it is passed down.
And it's still there, and it's still there, and it's still passed down orally even now. So whatever you can go to a bookstore or go to Amazon and buy all the books that you can find on Wicca and witchcraft. But the reality here is that so much of it is orally taught that you'll never find in those books.
Exactly. I was just going to say, it's passed down orally. The whole point when we get initiated is we have to write down what our elders tell us, because it is an oral tradition. Okay. And these are our book of shadows, and they are passed down to us It is up to us to write them, okay? And then we keep them, and we of that we make our own, okay? And especially if you're in a coven. But getting back to, you've got to remember too, these traditions were passed down orally, and even to be caught with a broom, like the tools of the trade, okay, or the tools of the craft, okay, were kept secret, because you've got to remember when this whole burning time happened, they obliterated mostly women, okay, but they obliterated a lot of the folklore, a lot of the cunning folk. These are the people who held the tradition, okay, and it went underground. It went deep underground. You've got to remember, at this time, I mean, it wasn't until the 50s that the whole witchcraft was no longer considered a crime and held for treason. So that's why, you're not going to get this history that you're looking for, Jean Jerome, that, somehow there's this document or whatever. These were oral traditions, and indigenous, people indigenous to the UK, the Celtic people, and so on. This was passed on orally, just like it would be in any shamanic practice, in any shamanic indigenous peoples, original peoples. It is done orally. And this is that is the difference between an initiated witch and a non-initiated, and one who finds things in books and, oh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm the, the next best thing to a bag of socks. No, you're not.
You're not. So going on that, like for instance, when my mom in Cuba was asked to do a job for UNESCO to basically rescue and to gather information from the Afro descendants in terms of the various belief systems. Most of her region, my mom would go into some of the most remote parts of Cuba, in the mountain and everything else, where they're very old. In England, and from this job of rescuing these traditions, was that, and after the outlawing of magic in quotation mark, would you say that most of these practitioners that were able to maintain these lineages for centuries orally were actually found in the countryside?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay.
Most of them, and also probably in the cities, but a lot of people, I mean, it's really hard to, like, for example, Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki, she, her grandfather was the walker for the village that she grew up in. If I'm remembering my stories right from what my high priestess told me, because she and Dolores were friends, and she received a lot of information from her grandfather about the practices of the witchcraft that was happening in that particular farming community. And honestly, when you get outside of a city and your life revolves around the seasons, because you're in terms of food and whether or not you're going to survive in the winter, whether it's you're growing the food from the ground, or you're dealing with animal husbandry.
The animals, yes.
You're tied very close to the land, and it's through that connection with the land that these types of practices have developed over the centuries, and there's different practices depending upon where you are in the UK, and even here in North America, it's the same thing. It's like, and that's why Wicca is not witchcraft is not just one thing. It's many different things depending on where you are. And that's why I said in terms of Gerald Gardner's books, he said he gave a skeletal aspect to say, here, this is what we believe, this is the basics of how we do things. Now go make it your own. Your connection with deity or deities and the land is extraordinarily personal, There's no need to have a priest or a high priestess or whomever being an intercessor between you and divinity. That's between you and your deities, wherever they happen to be, whether you're worshiping deities of the land that you're in, or whether you're worshiping deities from places that you feel called to.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, not everybody. So that's kind of how it comes. And a lot of people who come to witchcraft or paganism or even Wicca, there's usually a sense of, I've come home. This is where my heart has always been. This is where I've always meant to be. And so we hear this a lot from people who are new to paganism, new to Wicca and witchcraft. That they are coming home to something that's called to their souls, and how they sing, and I'm going to use that metaphorically, sing that their soul to the deities is individualistic. In terms of a tradition of Wicca, we follow those particular traditions because those sing to our souls. But that does not preclude our own individuality and how we choose to connect to deity and which deities we connect to. Because how one Gardnerian coven practices will be different to a different coven. And even though there will be core material that is the same, things will be different. And the strongest covener is based upon how strong the individuals are as solitary practitioners. So practicing on your own, connecting with deity on your own, and then coming together in communities in terms of covens, or even in festivals, you see each person is their own intercessor with deity, and how they do it is personal.
Okay.
Now, I want to read out what my friend Beth, hi Beth, what she has written here. I recall reading a memoir that talked about how everyone in her village went to church on Sunday because to do otherwise would draw unwelcome attention to them. But on Wednesdays, they were in circle. Exactly. Because you've got to remember, at that time, the church was extremely, getting very strong in England. And they were, if a woman was left alone or widowed or whatever, the church had the right to take away their land even. Okay. So you as a woman, or you as anyone who had any of your belief systems that were handed down, as cunning people, because really that's what they were, the witches, the original witches, right? These were people who used their folk magic, their folk traditions. Okay. They had no problem integrating with the current modern religion of Christianity, because they used it, they understood it and used it in a way they were able to practice. So yeah, they had to go to church, they had to show up. To do anything else was, well, basically you were burned at the stake. Okay. So there was a lot more fear-based in the UK and through parts of Europe as well, to not show up and go to church, and everything was hush, hush, hush. You just couldn't talk about stuff like that out in the open, right? But yes, they were handed down orally, and it was up to your initiator, your elder, to tell you these things and to write these things down, okay? Because they are of an oral tradition. Anyway,
or you have to remember them, or you have to remember them, and you're taught the stories over and over and over until it's drilled into your head that the information is there. Nowadays, we don't have to worry about that so much, because in many places in North America and in the UK, being a witch is okay. It's fine. And though there are still some places in Canada and in the US and even probably in the UK and Europe and other countries where not being Christian could cause problems. But
absolutely.
And so having your stuff written down could cause problems later on. But we're now technically in the information age now. And so we have a lot of people. That's why we have so many books. We have people are creating their own books of shadows. But in terms of Wicca, there are specific books of shadows that are passed down through the lineages. Yeah.
And you've got to remember too, at our time, we also had to know, and I've screwed up my history here, but I'm going to, that's why I want to go back, because we do have people and we have to remember those names. These are the ancestors within our tradition that maintained it as far as back as we know. Who they knew, we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's there. Anyway, go ahead, John Jerome. You're going to say something before I continue with my other questions.
Yeah, I just find it interesting, Beth's comment is that, again, church on Sunday, but on Wednesday, specifically the day Wednesday, they were in circle. Inifa, in the Holy Oath of Okana Ofun, the day Wednesday from the Julian calendar is called the Day of Confusion. And it's called Oju Reiru, and is the day when ceremonies or offerings are made to the spiritual, or the essentially the heavenly witches, which is very interesting that they should use Wednesday, right? Because even in Africa, I know kind of Wednesday is the day of Mercury as well, the day of Eshu, and the communion with the witches, the Iami Oru, the Iami of the heaven.
Of the heavens,
yeah.
The skies.
And it could be that was the only day that they could all get together and not worry about what's going on. I mean, Wiccans and witches are highly pragmatic and practical people. And so, but the thing is, so, I mean, it was very common for people to go to church on and exude that they are a good, God-fearing Christian, and that so that they could practice their witchcraft without any problems. Yeah, without any scrutiny and stuff like that. I mean, I'll give you an example. I have friends who live in very Christian neighborhoods, and if they do ritual in the backyard or whatever, they have problems with their neighbors. Just recently, a pagan in northern Saskatchewan was dealing with issues with her neighbors who were devout Christians because she was practicing her paganism in her backyard. And so there's still a lot of this issues. I mean, even into the 1980s and 1990s here in Canada, you could be fired for being a witch. You could lose your children for being a witch. There's so many different things. The prosecution of witchcraft was still very much because of the centuries of propaganda that the Catholic Church and the Protestant churches put on witchcraft. The other factor here, I'm lucky that I live in a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. All my neighbors around me are Jewish, and we've never had a problem with them. In fact, when we first moved into our house, we were doing a Lammas ritual in our backyard. I'm setting up, and I see my neighbors. I see a figure standing in my backyard neighbor's yard, and I was like, "Hi, can I help you?" And she goes, "Yeah, she goes, "Yeah, hi, I see you're new here, and I was just kind of wondering what you're doing." And I'm like thinking, it's like, I can't lie because we're about to do ritual in the backyard, and I'm wearing robes, and I'm wearing my athame, and I'm wearing my cords, and everything. The bell, book, and candle is all out on the altar table. We're getting ready, and I said,
"It's screaming
I can't lie to her." So I can't lie to her, and so I say, "Oh well, we're Wiccan, and we're about to celebrate one of our high holidays called Lammas." And I thought to myself, just like, next thing I thought was, if you're more than welcome to join us or watch from where you are. Like, I was very welcoming and being very inclusive into that because she's my backyard neighbor. She was very grateful, very and they're Orthodox. All right. They're
There you
Orthodox
go.
Jews. And so she turned to she said, "Oh no, don't worry, I'm going to go inside, but I don't want to be a bother to you," which was uh, night and day from other people's experiences. As she goes back into her house, she calls out to her husband. I forget what her husband's name is. She goes, "We've got witches!" Like it was the best thing on the planet. And I just burst. I was like, "This is awesome. This is great." I mean, my neighbors know that and whenever we've done rituals in the backyard, if my neighbors
Yep.
are in their backyard, I usually let them know, like, we're about to do this.
Yes.
And they're like going,
Yes.
"Okay, we'll make sure that when you're doing your ceremony, we'll keep it down." Or they go inside. And they go, "We wish you we wish you a happy, they say, we wish you a happy high holiday," or whatever. And they're wishing us good wishes for our holidays, which is a completely different experience, because I think it's because I'm in a Jewish neighborhood. Because people now a long time ago, when we had the house next to us was a rental house, we had evangelicals there that were renting the house. And I think, Teresa, you were there at the time, and when Mark and Evan started doing the big sword fight thing at Harvesttide, and these evangelical missionaries were looking through the windows, visibly shaking like this. And the other ones were like looking around the edge of the house going, "Oh my," and they realized, and they were out the next day. They were gone the next day. They left. But so, I mean, it's a different experience, but I mean, I think it really depends. So the prosecution of witches even continues unto today. And because they don't understand, because of the propaganda that the Christian churches, both Catholic and non-Catholic, have produced over centuries, has really changed people's minds about what witches really are. And we're not that. We're not the Wicked Witch of the West.
No, we're not. And let's also blame Hollywood, okay? Hollywood loves to really demonize the witch, you know. Hollywood is some in a lot of respect to a lot of faiths other than the ones that are common. The worst enemy as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, I want to move forward with another question here.
Sure.
Now, having said what we have, and we're not going to go into what we were talking about before, but that's okay. I want to move to, given the fact that Wicca, witchcraft, is a practice as well as a belief system, could you give examples of the pillars or the tenets of the belief system, like the cosmology, and the cosmology being the divine, who is the deity, who's the main deity, and also the acceptance. And I know we've had this conversation, the acceptance of even Jesus and Mary in the sense, okay, of the craft, because of the way we view deity. Okay, so I'm going to read the comments afterwards. I know there's a lot of people piping in and everything, but we're going to keep it moving. So getting back to the question here, so could you give us examples of the pillars, like, describing the cosmology, the ancestors, like with ancestor worship or ancestor connection, and any modalities or practices, maybe we'll look at that as a different question, but let's look at the cosmology.
Okay, so Dion Fortune was a spiritualist, occultist who wrote in many different books. One of her most common, well-known books is The Mystical Kabbalah. But I think my brain's not there. There's so many books. But she coined the phrase, "All gods are one god. All goddesses are one goddess. But there is yet one initiator." Now, since she wrote that, it's kind of changed to be, "All gods are one god. All goddesses are one goddess. and together they are one. And so it has kind of been adopted by many, not everybody, but by many Wiccans and witches, to say that deity has been seen as polytheistic, duotheistic, and monistic. Not monotheistic, but monistic. There is nothing within Wicca that tells you who you're supposed to believe, how you're supposed to believe, and how you are supposed to practice, unless you are in a specific tradition and in a coven. That said, those particular deities within those covens are for that coven only. Thank you, Jean Jerome. And who an individual connects to in terms of their deity is completely individualistic. And with members within my own coven, we have people who connect with Celtic deities. We have people who connect with Norse deities. We have people who connect with Buddhas. We have people who connect, who just see deity as not a specific, within a specific mythological context, but just as god and goddess, which is fine. Within Wicca, we don't tell you who you must believe and how you are to believe those deities. Right. How we practice within a coven is purely within the coven. How we practice within the tradition is purely within the tradition. And when we meet together in a coven within that tradition, we work within that consensus. When we go home and practice on our own, that is completely individualistic. And and in terms of deity, it's fine. Who I connect to in terms of deity is different than my husband. And in terms of, and that's fine, and that's great, and it allows for more diversity. Now, as time has progressed from Gerald Gardner's time to now, we're starting to, there's more of a view being developed or being arrived at, that deity is not binary either. So and that's okay, and that's good, and becomes more inclusive to people who are not specifically on that binary spectrum, like there and then there, right? So it's now becoming a spectrum of who you're connecting with, because if humans are a reflection of deity, then we need to celebrate all aspects of humanity, because humanity is non-binary. It's on this spectrum, and it's a glorious spectrum for everybody to connect with in terms of witchcraft. In terms of connecting for Christians who come to witchcraft, bringing in, or Wicca, bringing their connection to, say, Mary and Jesus. Who am I, or who is anyone to say, no, you can't?
Absolutely.
That would be like me saying to anybody, say, if you don't worship this particular god and this particular goddess, then you're not really what you say you are. And that's just bull, as far as I'm concerned. Because
exactly, Karen. And I wanted to say, and that's where you really see a lot of people who, in my estimation, those that are not initiated, are highly critical of people in the Christian tradition for believing in Jesus and Mary, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, as you and I both know, that's, it doesn't even take initiation to understand that. But those that are really following a true craft and a true lineage understand that. And understand the basics, because there's a lot of I would call the fluffy bunnies out there that have these absolute statements that they make, that you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't. Who are you to tell any of us?
Yeah. Now,
Seriously.
but if a person is within a particular tradition and a coven and stuff like that, that's within that coven and that tradition. And what happens outside, that's their little own circle. And what happens outside of that sphere of experience, I mean, that's a different sphere. So we have different spheres, like we're all little bubbles floating on the surface of the ocean, and this ocean is spirituality, and we're all in these little bubbles, whether we're in coven bubbles or solitary bubbles or whatever bubbles, and we're all floating on this ocean. And our practice is to become more spiritual, to connect with deity, to connect with divinity, to increase our spirituality. Yes. I mean, talking about the tenets, we're talking about how do we see the spirituality and celebrate that in not only in each other, but in nature too, because nature, we all are part of nature, and there needs to be a reconnect to that to the natural world in whatever way we can, depending upon our personal lives. Some people live in rural places, and how they do it is different than who live in cities, and depending on how big the cities too do it and stuff like that. Whether or not they're in an apartment or a condo or in a house or whatever, or is there a park nearby they can get to? Whether they have a backyard. There's so many different aspects, but the fact of the matter is that we're all these little bubbles on this ocean of spirituality, and our job is to become one with that oceans and love that ocean, which is the universe, in however way we want to see it, whether we want to see it as the great mother, or we want to see it as a particular deity, or the source, or whatever. We want to see it as a god or a goddess or a specific god or a specific goddess. It doesn't matter. It's about the spirituality and whether or not we're becoming better and more spiritual people through our connections and our spiritual practices. And that's what's really important, is that connection to the universe around us, and how we make those connections is individualistic and also dictated based upon whether or not we're in a coven and in a particular tradition, in the context of working in those covens at that time. I was going
to say, and working within the tradition itself and its framework, its format, right?
Yeah.
And again, to mention animism into all of this, because it's with connecting with the earth, it's connecting with all the other creatures, so it's connecting with the seasons, because you've got to remember, this is ultimately the craft was ultimately an indigenous shamanic belief system, okay? And it wasn't until, like what we're talking about, Gardner and coming in and all the degrees all of a sudden, and all of this never existed. This was just common people's knowledge that was passed down orally. Okay.
So what we have is that, I mean, there were initiations. As to whether or not there were degrees of initiation, it's probable that Gerald Gardner brought those 3 degrees of initiation in from Masonry. But but there were initiations to become a witch back in the UK. So so we have people who are initiated, and some people who were like my grandma, that would say, well, this is what my family did at this particular time each year. The family traditions. We did this at this time. My grandfather, I heard, one person I knew, his grandmother had a book of recipes, and that included cures and herbs and all this other stuff, as well as, this is a really good bread baking recipe, that sort of thing.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, and then his grandfather, had a journal about the clouds, and what the clouds look like this today, that means that this is going to happen.
Right.
That sort of thing. and usually he was correct. So I had a friend whose grandparents were like that, and so these types of folk practices are still very much part of many places in the UK, in Ireland, and in Europe. Even if it's under the practices or the auspices of Catholicism or other forms of Christianity. We see a lot of this types of things in Italy, where you have very devout Catholic people who do magic, who do the folk magic and stuff like that. We see that type of thing in Mexico, where we see people who are very devout Catholics, and they're practicing their handed down indigenous magics to help the people. Generally, people who become witches and Wiccans, they do so because they want to serve humanity. They want to serve the planet. They want to make life better for everybody on this planet that we're all connected with. And so there's usually a desire of service in some way. And each person will serve their deities based upon what calls to them.
Right. And I think it's an individual thing too. I mean, serving their community in that way. Also connecting is that individual sense to connect it to the divine and how they connect with it. Right. Yeah. So moving from that, did you want to say anything about any of the modalities or practices? And do you feel comfortable talking about that?
So some of the common practices that you see within Wicca are circle casting a circle, standing in a circle, which is a great equalizer. When you don't have somebody standing on a pulpit, and and that person is in the center or they're at the edge of the circle, everybody are equals, and the first among equals is the person running the show. So there's a balance of equality within the circle because it's a circle. So casting a circle, inviting or recognizing the four directions, and thus the four Aristotelian elements of earth, air, fire, and water, and the associations that go with those directions and those elements. There's usually some sort of invitation to deity to come into the circle and be there, or to watch over the circle.
And the ancestors too are called in.
Sometimes it depends. It depends on the group. It depends on the tradition. It depends on the individuals. But if somebody wants to do ancestral appreciation or whatever, they can do that. Some groups will do what's called a land recognition statement, to recognize that the land that we're currently on is indigenous, North American indigenous, and that we're here by the grace of their being, and just to recognize those spirits and those people. Some groups will do that. So calling in deity, there's usually some sort of working period where whether it's
there's
celebration,
a function and a purpose of what we're doing when we do gather together, right?
So either some sort of celebration or a working of magic for a particular purpose. Then there's usually, I'm going to use a Christian term, a Eucharist, where there's a blessing and sharing of wine and cakes. And then usually
my favorite part.
And I'm really lucky. I have a governor who makes us our wine, and he's fantastic. And he just bottled all the wine today, and I'm like going, more wine. I'm like going, why did you call me over so I can help drink it? Bottle it. No, drink it. No, bottle it. But
help me to bottle the wine. Sure, okay, Karen.
I'm bottling it in my tummy. But no, that's probably why he didn't invite me over. But the thing is, but then after that, there's usually a saying farewell to deity, or saying thank you, deity, for being with us. Some people will say farewell. Some people will say thank you for allowing us to be in your space. It really depends on how they do it. Saying farewell to the elements and of the directions, and then taking down the circle And in some groups, a giant hug is a great way to end it all.
That's
Giant
right.
a group hug. So
I always liked the feasting at the end. That was my
yeah,
favorite.
yeah. So usually, meals are shared afterwards for the big holidays. For a Sabbath, for those are called the Sabbath. There's 8 Sabbats, a space approximately every 6 weeks. We're coming up to a Lammas, which is on the 1st of August.
That's right.
And that's considered one of the first major big feast festival. We pagans really like our food.
Uh-huh.
Yes, we really do. And so, and even in terms of coven work and in terms of the espats, there's usually a sharing of a meal either before
That's
the
right.
ceremony or after the
Yeah.
ceremony,
Afterwards.
or even
Yeah.
sometimes during the ceremony, depending on
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
situations. Yeah.
No,
So
definitely. Definitely.
yeah. So those
Okay.
are some
Well,
of the practices.
right. Okay. Thank you. And I think that sort of gives the general overall, and from there, it's everything else, the tools we use, whatever, but that becomes a teaching part, depending on,
Yeah.
again, on the coven and the lineage and stuff. So we're not
Yeah.
going to go there. So moving to my other question is, what are the marked differences of the craft between Canadian and American?
Oh, that's a loaded
I'm going to
question.
open up that can of worms. Let's
Yeah,
do it.
thank you. Thank you so much for putting me in the hot seat. My
I'll
experience,
support
and I
you. I'll
can,
support you.
yeah, I'm going to, I have to talk from my own personal experience.
Right.
Originally, a long time ago, let's put it this way: most people forget that Canada exists in anything. They'll either talk about the United States or they'll talk about the UK.
Right.
Canada doesn't seem to exist for a lot of people in terms when it comes to Wicca, or they will lump us in as Americans. We are not Americans. We're Canadian. We're proud to be Canadian. We're going to stay Canadian.
Right.
And so what I have found from my own personal experiences is that we're human beings, and so we have the same foibles as everybody else. That said, my experience within the gardenering community was at first, a long time ago, very divisive. Everybody was like, you're not one of us unless you're this. That's changed. That I don't know what shifted in the paradigm of Gardnerian Wicca but that seems to be shifting to be more inclusive and more accepting. It might be just I'm hanging around with the people that I should be hanging around with and connecting with the people I should be connecting with. I don't know. That might be part of it. But I think there's more acceptance nowadays. We're seeing that the different lines are now talking to each other more and sharing and helping each other and just realizing, you know what, we're all in this together in our own unique ways and we need to support each other. And that's the important thing. We're all children of the gods and the goddesses, and we need to stop acting like petulant 2-year-olds in a lot of cases. So I think in the time that I've been involved, which is a long time, from like I'm not just talking about the years of having been initiated, but even before, there's a lot more inclusiveness. There's more desire to reach out and create
It's
a larger
evolving.
community.
It's definitely evolving. I can see that.
Yeah. It's maturing. I think that's the big thing. It's maturing. We're kind of out of the I'm better than you are stage, and you're not really real because you didn't do X and you didn't do Y because you won't tell me or whatever. And I'm sure there's still a lot of people out there, no matter where they are in the world, who might be acting in those ways. But I have found that lately more people seem to be more mature and more accepting and more involved in community building rather than community destroying.
I think so. I think there's a maturity. I think because we're becoming elders, and so now, we're the ones that are leading and setting the example. And I
Yeah.
think that's important to understand.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you, could you describe why there's so much secrecy, let's say, in some traditions as opposed to other traditions? Okay. And I know generally we've already spoken about the burning times and everything, but why is there that?
Okay. So there's two reasons. It depends. One, it really depends on where you live and how accepting the the general community, not pagan. I'm talking about the community in which a pagan or a witch or a Wiccan lives in is accepting
Right,
of
the
these
environment,
things.
the direct
If they're not,
environment.
yeah, if they're very conservative or very Christian and conservative or evangelical or whatever, they will tend to it's safer to for a lot of people to be quiet about it. There's still a lot of concern that parents will have their children taken away from them,
Absolutely.
or and the like, maybe lose their jobs. Even though our Charter of Rights and Freedoms here in Canada doesn't allow for that, it still can occur. And so depending on where the people live, it will determine whether or not they need to be quiet about it so they don't have crosses burning on their lawns. So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect here is more important, in my opinion, is that when you start telling everybody all your secrets, they're no longer secrets and they lose power. And so if you are doing something, or in terms of Gardnerian Wicca, there are many secrets involved. There's this joke of what happens in circle stays in circle, and it's because it's to help maintain the
integrity,
the trust between the group members, but it also doesn't allow for the bleeding of the energy that may have worked within that coven for that particular ritual, or whatever, to go. If so, for example, you do some sort of working, whether it's meditation or spell work or whatever, to find a boyfriend or attract a boyfriend, not a love spell, but an attraction to find the right type of partner for yourself. If you do this spell work or whatever, and then you go out and you start going to bars and say, yeah, I did a spell to attract the right person to me, or you start talking to your friends, people, and it's like, yeah, I did this thing to attract, hopefully he'll show up. What you're doing is you're just basically bleeding that energy. There is a saying called the witch's ladder, or the ceremonial ladder, called, and it's to know, to will, to dare, and to keep silent. And for many people, shutting up and keeping your lips closed is very difficult.
Hard to do.
Yeah. And that's the hardest thing for a lot of people to practice. So and that so for secrecy ways, in terms of the magic that might be being done within the circle, or what's being done in the circle, if everybody starts blabbing about what's going on, it's no longer special. It's no longer sacred, right? If everybody knows, so that's the thing. So if everybody knows all of everything and shares it with everything, it becomes mundane, and it loses some of its impact, in my opinion. Now that might not be the opinion of other people, but this is my opinion. So and this is what I was taught as well by my high priestess, is that you don't go off and blab to everybody about what you're doing or how you're doing things, because it takes away the specialness of what you're doing, right? So
and it comes down to, a properly prepared person, right? Doing the work.
Yeah.
And to be properly prepared, you have to have certain amount of things that you know how to do, and you're not going to blather it out, because in essence you're losing, like you said, you lose that energy, you lose that power, and at that point in time, now what? It comes down to
it's like Yeah, you go
Comes
around and
down
you
to
say, yeah, I did the
integrity and
spell.
respect.
You go around and you say, oh yeah, I did the spell to do this, and stuff like that. And you tell everybody, and then you're like going, why am I taken away with my arms in the tied up behind my back in this weird little paddy wagon? Ooh, rubber walls. It's like we don't need that either.
Or someone who's going around claiming that they can, cast or put people in predicaments, like
Yeah,
jars or something like that, thinking that, they're all that in a
yeah,
bag of chips,
yeah,
well, great, that's
yeah,
wonderful. But unless you're properly prepared and really know what you're doing, you're not doing anything. You really aren't.
yeah.
And
You
going
could
around
end up
talking
causing
about it,
more.
you're
Yeah, you
leaking all of
could end
that out,
Yeah, you could end up
it does
causing more
nothing good.
harm, not only
Absolutely.
not only to yourself but to other people in that regards too. So,
And
um,
you're also bringing attention to you unwillingly from
yes,
sources that you don't know what you're doing, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So my final question before Jean Jerome takes over is, what are the different traditions? And I'm not going to get into all of
Oh
them,
my
but
God.
just basic, what are the different traditions, or shall I say, the types of witchcraft? Okay. And I think you've already defined your tradition, but, just in general, some of the traditions and the things that we were talking about, and that was already mentioned. We've talked about Gardnerian, we've talked about Alexandrian, and I want to kind of take it to what is a hedge witch, what is a solitary, that type of thing. So just
Okay.
general. I don't want to go into all the different traditions that are out there, but these are your
Thank you.
general.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, we have solitary practitioners. Those are people, generally most people start off as solitary. Most people continue being solitary, even also when they're coven work, as well. Solitary work is where a lot of people start, if they can't find other people to work with, they're doing stuff on their own. They're exploring their own spirituality in
Mm-hmm.
in the context of Wicca or witchcraft, and they're doing their own thing. And that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
But not everything's in books. And so usually what happens is over a period of time, people go, oh, wait a second, I need to learn more. I need to connect with other people and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And they may either go and find a coven to work with, or they might just want to socialize with other pagans. And that's where moots fill in those, that need,
Right.
festivals and stuff like that fill in those needs as well. So I mean, in terms of a hedge witch, you're dealing with people maybe who are dealing more with, more natural magics from where they are, particularly taking from the land directly around them. Kitchen witches,
More
uh,
herbal.
kind
They're
of like,
more steeped in herbs and working with herbs and that type of thing.
or just doing stuff in their kitchen. It's like, oh, they're making bread, but they're using herbs and spices to make a particular type of loaf of bread that is important. They're not buying lots of stuff from the occult shop, from an occult shop. They're just using, oh, a butter knife will work, that sort of thing. They're very
Mhm.
pragmatist in terms of their practice and the like. So we have
But
many.
they are utilizing prayer, and there's a certain amount of things that they are doing and a blessings, and they're, when we say hedge witches, it's not, I mean, anybody can pretty well call themselves a hedge witch, but what sets them apart is how they practice and their connection with their own personal deity, or how they see deity, right?
Yes, yes, yeah.
So they're
So
almost like solitary practitioners, but with a focus on a certain aspect of the craft.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, everybody is very different, and I wouldn't say that those are specifically traditions,
Hmm.
but I would say
They're
that
more
there's just different
definitions.
ways of connecting with deity in however the way they want. Not everybody wants to be in a coven. Not everybody wants to be in a specific witchcraft
Absolutely.
tradition, and that's okay, and that's fine, and that's a good thing.
Hmm.
But still, there's many different traditions out there of Wicca and witchcraft and paganism, and there's so many books on the different types as well, and it allows for a great level of exploration for so many people, which is wonderful. You want this exploration because not everybody's spiritual path is the exact same as everybody else's.
Okay. All right. So did you want to say anything more as far as Alexandrian is concerned, or Gardnerian, any of that type of thing? Just briefly.
They're Gardnerian and Alexandrian traditions are probably some of the oldest forms of Wicca that we have. Or the most well-known forms of Wicca that we have.
Right.
There are many other types of traditions, like the Odyssean tradition of the Wiccan Church of Canada, Dianic witchcraft, fairy Wicca, fairy witchcraft. There's so many. There's Central Valley Wicca. There's so many different types of Wicca out there and it's great because it allows. There's the Aquarian Tabernacle Church of Wicca, and there's just so many different things. Yeah, they're mainly on the West Coast and in the United States, but they have chapter temples all over Canada. All over the world actually, and the Arch High Priestess for HBF Canada is Mary Malinsky, and she's on Vancouver Island. She's a wonderful person. She is so knowledgeable and so sweet, and I'm so glad I met her at the Parliament of World Religions
in Toronto. And when was that, Karen? Was that in 2018?
November 2018, yes.
Right. Okay. I thought so. Okay. So I think I'm done with my questions. Jean-Jerome, did you want to go from there?
Yeah, there's a few things. So I'm just going to
read some of the people's comments or whatever. Go from there, Jean-Jerome.
Yeah. So, okay, there's a few things. So comment-wise, there was one here. Question: what is your opinion on the third fold law that has been so dominant in Wicca? What is your concept and opinion?
Sorry, the third. Oh, the third.
The threefold law.
Oh, the threefold. Okay. Is it a law? No, not really. It's a rule, and a lot of people misinterpret it as is what you give out, you'll get back 3 times. That's not correct.
Right.
Yeah. A lot of people attribute it to a Wiccan version of karma, and it's not. Karma is East Indian in terms of its Hinduism, and in terms of Buddhist practice. That's where the idea of karma comes from. Within the threefold law, or the threefold rule, is really quite interesting. A lot of people, as I said, think if you do something good, the universe will give you good stuff 3 times back. That's not how it works. Basically, it is this: if somebody does something bad to you or something good to you, you give back 3 times that amount. That's how it works. So if somebody does you something good, like does you a favor or whatever, or does you or gives you a gift, you return it back threefold. So if somebody helps you with whatever, you help them back threefold. If somebody does you harm, or hurts you in some way, there's this. You can do something.
A retaliation.
Yeah. So retribution. Now that is coupled in terms of the Wiccan Rede, which states, "If it harms none, do what you will." So, which is actually a permission to act, as long as you're going to take the responsibility of that act.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of the threefold rule, it's not a law. It is not really. It's not mandatory. It's something that you know, if the universe gives you something good, give it back. For example, this is a long time ago. I was walking down the street. Financially, things were tight for my husband and I at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm walking
Mm-hmm.
down my street and I find, I kid you not, $150 in $50 bills. There's
Oh,
nobody
okay.
around. There's nobody around. And to go and find, and it was just loose. It wasn't even in a wallet or anything. And I go, oh my God. It's like, okay, the universe just gave me $50, like $150. This was in, and then it's like, okay, what are we going to do with this? All right. I mean, that's really great. That's wonderful. It helps us. Well, one of our other friends at that time was having a real, even worse financial difficulties at that time. And and it was getting closer to Christmas time. And he didn't know if he would be able to buy his kids any Christmas gifts.
Right.
And so we said, we gave, so it financially for him to pay his rent and stuff. So we gave him $100 of the money
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because
Right.
we only
It's,
needed 50 of it, but he needed it more. And that's how the threefold rule is supposed to be. The universe gives you something, you give it back. You
you
help,
share
you
it.
use it to help other
Absolutely.
people. You and stuff like that. If
Yeah.
something bad happens to you, you do something to change it to hopefully not
Mm-hmm.
be a bad thing anymore.
Mm-hmm. Or you turn it
So
back 3 times as worse.
yeah,
I'm
it's
just
more,
kidding.
yeah,
I'm just kidding.
it's a guideline. It's a
Yeah.
guideline.
Yeah.
But it's not karma. It's not meant to be
And it's
seen as a
not
karmic thing.
exactly, and it's not a way of tying a witch's hands to
Mm.
not reciprocate whether something's bad or something's good.
Yeah.
It is
And
just
that's why,
meant as a
yeah.
guideline.
And that's why you see a lot of pagans and witches and Wiccans who are environmentalists, who do a lot of work with animals, or maybe even will do things like being even just vegetarian or vegan, or
Mm-hmm.
some of them might be using their power to make changes for the betterment of society, even to the point of protesting our current
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
situation. And that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. How they feel that they need to do this change to create a positive change for everybody
Right.
or for everything or focus on whatever. It's again, it's very individualistic. But the threefold rule is about giving more than what you get.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. I hope that answered your question, Ken. Is there other questions? Jay, how do you think COVID has affected our communities spiritually?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think a lot of people are feeling isolated.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much that Zoom meetings can provide. So I think in a lot of ways, the community feels we're kind of back to like 150 years ago. People have to go back to being solitary and practicing on their own, but it's really difficult for a lot of people in today's day and age, especially who live in cities and who are actively part of their communities, to take a step back. That being said, this is also the perfect opportunity and time for internal spiritual work by people.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Absolutely.
you and so take that time to work on spirituality for yourself, for other people, and the like. And as COVID restrictions are lifted, be careful, be safe. I know some covens that are already starting to meet and get together in small groups and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's small
Mm-hmm.
groups and they do that. In depending on where they are in the world. In some
Mm-hmm.
places they don't have the
Mm-hmm.
space
Mm-hmm.
to do that,
Mm-hmm.
or it's just too dangerous. So they're just still, we'll just do our Zoom talks and connect
Yep.
in that way.
Yep.
This past Monday
Yep.
we had our first moot, and
That's right. It was done
yeah,
outside.
yeah, we decided to do it at High Park here in Toronto because there was enough space to allow for social distancing. And if people wanted to wear masks, they could. There was a concession stand for people to buy food. So there was a lot of space, and we had a fairly good turnout. Not everybody
Nice.
might feel comfortable coming, and that's okay. But that being said, during COVID, I think it takes. I think this is a perfect time to take the opportunity to focus on internal spiritual work, to connect with deity and work your magics to make a better world despite the shit show that's going on right now. We're the ones that help change reality. So let's change it in a positive way. For some people,
We're
that
the
might be
ones that
very difficult.
manifest. You know, I mean, if we take our role seriously, we have to look at ways that we change, and we make those changes by manifesting them ourselves. That's what our spell work is all about. You know, and
Exactly.
working the craft, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Was there any other? Okay, Ken is talking about CX Wicca. That's a different tradition. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that.
CX Wicca was created by Raymond Buckland and
Yes.
and became its own tradition of Wicca. Now, Raymond Buckland himself was a Gardnerian high priest, and a lot of Gardnerians have written and still write for the general population to create so that they can connect with Wicca and witchcraft on their own and stuff like that without having to break our oaths of secrecy that we swear when we're initiated. So Seax Wicca came out of that. Other forms of Wicca come out of that. Pagan Way tradition came out of that as well. So it's just another tradition and that people can take from a book and then grow from there if it calls to them. Yeah.
And here we have different pictures of Gardner himself.
Raymond Buckland. So interesting.
Sorry.
They're all white haired.
They all look the same.
They all look the same.
I think there's a general archetype for high priests.
Yeah, I think there is. I don't think it's arbitrary.
I think there is.
I think suspicious.
My husband's starting to get that white beard, though he's getting the white hair, but he's bald on top, but he's getting all the whiteness. But I'm not letting him get shaggy. I won't let him get all shaggy in terms of that. So, but yeah.
No, it's true. They all look the same. Really true.
A common theme here. Okay, I've got really 3 related questions. You touched on them, but I feel that perhaps some viewers that are coming from other traditions, especially the Afro-descending traditions and all that, maybe be a little bit confused or not quite understand. One thing is you've mentioned many times, the concept of, the circle, and you made a clarification when Teresa asked you about the ancestors. You basically mentioned it sort of like, yes, some groups may do that in some situations, but you mentioned very explicitly a number of times inviting the deity into the circle. So, but at the same time, you've also talked about all these different covens that may have compositions of people that have another ancestral tradition with their own pantheon of divinity. Yep. Could be Hindu, could be, anything Christian, whatever. My question is, in terms of the Gardnerian Wicca, and in terms of the sort of like the main thread of Wicca, although I understand that each one is sort of allowed the flexibility of, what would be referred to as, let's say, at least some common divinities, quote unquote, or deities that, and I'll explain why I'm asking that. Because for instance, in Orisha practice, right, within Ifa, the Ifa corpus tells us the stories, although there may be different variations and all that, but most of the stories give us certain characteristics, traits, secrets, and everything else about certain divinities, which in Nigeria, and the Yoruba people are called Orisha. On the Benin side, Togo side, we call Vodou or Voodoo. But that that knowledge, especially contained in the corpuses of Ifa, orally transmitted, but in the last 200 years, more of an effort's been made to codify them, to translate, put, to paper, to writing or digital, what has been passed on for millennium verbally. That's very important for or almost I'd say an integral pillar of the belief system, for it not just from a conceptual or dogmatic standpoint, but for it to work. Because when you're working with those divinities, when you're working with those energies, you need a recipe, something for it to basically within the thought practice for those ceremonies, those libations or whatever to work. How does it work within Wicca though? Like like when Gardner, so okay, we talked about Gardner basically going into the countryside or different places in England and maybe the British Isles and interviewing. What were the deities or divinities that were still being venerated, that were still being culted in those islands, and that possibly made their way as at least a foundation or a pillar of the belief system?
So generally, it sounds to me that you're looking for a specific mythological set of deities. Is that what you're looking for?
So the term mythological, like for instance, an Orisha for the Yoruba or even Vodou, there's some mythos behind it, but there's a practical, living, breathing, spiritual dynamic which has a consciousness and is very much alive. It's not just something from a book or a myth. So I'm talking about the living, breathing patrons or patriarch or patrons or protectors of the faith, if you want, for that lack of a better
word. So within Wicca there is the great goddess.
Okay.
How individuals see her, she has no name.
Okay.
The names that are that are attributed to her will be dependent upon which mythological sets people are drawn to, whether it be Celtic, Brittonic, European, Hellenic, Kemetic, Nordic. It doesn't matter. But it's the great goddess and her consort, the horned god. They are not given specific names. That is what so we have the great goddess and her consort, the horned god. They aren't given names that I can give you because those are only found within an initiated circle with initiates. And so when we call upon those deities, those are the god. That is the god and the goddess of Gardnerian craft.
Okay.
That being said, the different deities, different archetypal deities that we find within mythology of the Celtic mythology and stuff like that, can be seen as aspects of those the goddess and the god. We don't say that this particular god, that the goddess is only this way. Now that being said, if we're doing a celebration of Lammas, since Lammas is coming up, we might call upon a particular Celtic deity, a goddess, and a Celtic god at that time for that holiday. I'll give you an example. At Imbolg, which is Groundhog Day for all the mundanes out there, people who don't know about this. So
February
that,
2nd.
yeah, in Catholicism, it's called St. Bridget's Day. But St. Bridget was but it's
Or
also,
Candlemas.
or
Mm.
Candlemas,
Mhm.
but it's also a holiday that venerates Bridget, the Celtic goddess Bridget. So depending on the year and the time of year and what's being done, different deities may be called into the circle because their attributes are most appropriate for whatever is being worked in that circle at that time. But we are not limited to one specific mythological group. Now, are those individual deities individualistic and have their own personalities and stuff like that? Absolutely.
Mhm.
But the reason I'm saying that, because in order to, like, for instance, the reason I'm saying that is that to call Shango in a ceremony, if you have some situation, or to call Babaluaye, those are specific energies with specific attributes, specific taboos, AWOs.
Yep.
And they have a living, breathing consciousness to the point where one way or the other, even through an elegun, they can oftentimes, speak, or through any of the geomancy. So if you're calling, as you say, depending on that would require you to have, I'm assuming, either one of two things: an innate traditional record, right, of the characteristics, the taboos, the energies of those entities, or you have to have really good mediums.
So it's a combination of
really good mediums that can really have,
So,
can see, and then
yeah.
can sort of act as the go-between.
It's
Otherwise,
a combination.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's a combination. So, because in a lot of ways Wicca or witchcraft is a reconstruction. So, we are reconstructing based upon the mythologies that have been written about these particular deities that were probably and most likely worshipped in the UK or other places as well. So we have whatever writings from those times, plus whatever oral lore that we might have been given, plus, again, really good mediumship. Connecting, working with those deities so that they talk to us specifically and say, this is what we like, this is what we don't like, this is how you're going to do it. So if we're doing a ritual, like for Imbolc, if we're doing focusing our rituals solely on Bridget, we're going to probably do some research into anthropological texts, mythological texts, maybe archaeological texts, to see what those taboos are, what possible practices that were going on at that time for those particular deities, for Bridget, for example, and incorporate them within the ceremony for her at that time. And
right.
And we might, through meditation, through connect with that deity, so we can talk to her and say, hey, listen, lady, what do you like? What do you need? What do you want from us to do at this particular time? And she might go say, hey, I want to talk through the high priestess in the ritual to tell everybody what I want to say. And if she does that, then she does that. So we're not limited that way.
So basically what Karen is saying is it depends on the tradition, but it really is drawing down that energy. So as a medium or as a person that connects, you go into that trance and bring that deity down. The one thing, sorry, I probably had missed, I apologize. I had some problems with my phone. I had to come in here and plug in. My battery pack wasn't working. But anyway, I think what Karen was saying too, a large part of the British craft is we draw mostly from our Celtic roots, or from Celtic roots, because of course these are deities that are indigenous to the culture, right? In a tradition.
So it's not just Celtic, but we're also looking at British the British deities. So I mean, the British.
Mythologies.
If you look at the British Isles, their history, you had the Celts, and then you had the Anglo-Saxons come in, and then you had the Normans come in, who were a version of who were descendants of Norse people. The Anglo-Saxons were Germanic as well. So the UK becomes and then you have, even still you have the the Nordic peoples' invasions of England and their influences on the people. So I mean, and religion and the like. So we have all of these things. So the UK, it's not like it was a left alone for hundreds and thousands, like thousands of years. There were waves and waves of people bringing in their own deities, and as they did so, their practices kind of got mush-mushed with what was going on there. So you could have, like, the Celts. I mean, the Celts were there. So you had okay, so which Celts? Are you talking about the Welsh Celts? Are you talking about the Irish and Scottish Celts? Are you talking about the Cornish witches? I mean, are you talking about the Anglo-Saxons? Are you talking about the people who are descendants of the Norse who came in 400 or 500 years after the Anglo-Saxons arrived? That sort of thing. Right now, like on television, you can watch the TV show Vikings, and you can watch the TV show The Last Kingdom, and they're dealing with the exact same time period in British history, but the people that they're dealing with are not Celtic; they're Anglo-Saxon, they're British. And then when the Normans,
invasions of people coming in and bringing in their deities.
Oh, they're bringing in everything. So they become a giant melting pot of different deities and different practices, depending on where they are in the UK, in England. Right. So that's why within Wicca, we're saying the goddess and the god, because depending on where you are, it might be different. Okay. And we're talking maybe the maiden aspect of the goddess and the mother aspect of the goddess, or the crone aspect of the goddess, or we might be talking about the hunter aspect of the god, or we might be talking about the child aspect of the god, or the green man aspect of the god. And there's like many different types of aspects of deity that are more archetypical rather than specific to a mythology that we can also draw upon and not give it necessarily a name.
Okay.
And it's the stages of humanity, the stages of our as humans that we go through, that we address. It's a psychology of us as humans and how we relate.
So yeah, that too. So within Gardnerian Wicca, or these, do you do, other than mediumship, in order to convey or to communicate, do you actively use ancient system of divinity like Ogam, or do you use Norse mythology runes? Do you use any of the runes?
There's lots of different divinatory forms. So I don't know if anybody who does Ogam as a divinatory system, but there's tarot, there are runes, there are different types of runes depending on the type, depending on where those rune sets are coming from and what time period in history those rune sets are coming from. So you're dealing, I was given a divination system that was handed down to my high priestess by her grandmother, who is a Cornish witch. So I'm right now the only one who has that knowledge of that particular divination system. But there's many different types of divination systems, tons. There's scrying, there's so many different types that, depending on the people who do them, will be drawn to. Now, that being said, most Wiccan and witches and pagans will generally be drawn to either tarot cards or runes. But those aren't the only forms of divination that help people connect not only to each other, but also their spirituality and divinity.
Okay. And getting back to the question of ancestors. So many things, especially on the Vodun side, it is believed that it is your ancestral spiritual guide, the guide that accompanies the person when they come down to earth. It really is the conduit to being able to practice anything that you, or speak to anything, or use any system of geomancy. Is that which we call in Vodun a Joto, or an ancestral spiritual guide, your main ancestral spiritual guide. Not always not always of the same bloodline, but it's basically a spirit which is basically instructed or chooses the individual in order for that individual to carry out a mission or a mission. Does that concept exist?
It is, but it's not. There's some idea of witches who have passed away could, they become venerated, and they may choose to give information to practitioners who are currently alive. In terms of family bloodlines, again, it's so individualistic. There's nothing prescribed saying you have to do X, Y, and Z, and this is how you have to live or practice and stuff like that. There's nothing like that. And if now at Halloween, which we call Samhain, is a time when we believe that the veil between this world and the other world is the thinnest, and this would be a wonderful time to communicate with those who have gone before us, whether they are craft ancestors or bloodline ancestors or family ancestors, and that might not be blood ancestors, where we can call them and bring them into our ceremony and converse with them either through the divination tools or through mediumship.
Okay. So medium to okay. And before we go on, because their questions are building up, you can see there's a lot of interest in this conversation.
Right.
Within there's a new program, a new series that's come out on Netflix, which was filmed in Ireland, I believe, and it focuses on the Merlin, mythos and everything else, but specifically on the Fae, on the aspect of fairy magic and everything else within, that belief. So because you did mention, I believe earlier when we first started, you made a mention or it came out the concept of Fae or fairy magic. What does that really mean to you? And what does that mean within Wicca? What does that, do you see Fae or the term Fae as being a magical form, almost like a
entities onto themselves?
An entities of perfect, thank you. An entity in itself, some sort of ancient tribe or lineage with a certain understanding of, or relationship with nature. What does that concept of Fae magic and all that mean to you?
Okay, so fairies or the Sidhe or anything like that, those are really spirits of the land. And there's lots of different types of spirits. They're not, in some cases, some people might consider them as little deities, but there is just the whole concept of these races of beings that are connected to the earth but live in almost a side-by-side dimension with us. Is very prevalent in the British Isles and in Ireland, and for a lot of people, and even here as well. So the whole idea, and these concepts are so infused in our cultures. So we see this, house elves in Harry Potter. We see, Brian Froud's amazing works with dealing with the fairies and his artistry and stuff in terms of fairies. So the belief of fairies has been always very strong, and it comes down to whether or not the individual chooses to believe them or has an experience that makes them a believer in the fairies. As to exactly what those beings are, my personal experience with them is that they are spirits of the land. They're spirits of the plants and the animals. And I think at one point, maybe a long time ago, human beings were more connected, as we were more connected with the earth and less, we had more interactions with them. A lot of little practices of pouring milk and honey out to the fairies as an offering. Not brandishing iron because that's poisonous to the fairies. A lot of leaving out offerings to the fairies, like, for example, things going missing in your home, and you left your keys right there, or your glasses or something right there, and then you turned around and they're gone, and you just go, okay, I'd like this thing back, I'm going to leave you out this cookie, and then before you know it, you find your keys in a different spot. I mean, that sort of thing does happen. And my personal experience is, the fairies are real. These are spirits. We share this world with things that are unseen, and some of those spirit and some of those unseen entities are fairies. They can be very mischievous. They can be extremely helpful. They can also be very detrimental. They are their own thing. And we can choose to work with them, or we can choose not to work with them, but in my experiences, I like working with them. And when I do ceremonies that call upon the fairies for help or whatever, I do not have anything that has iron in it in the ritual, because that's a taboo. That's something that can cause them harm. Why would I have something like that in the circle if it's going to possibly cause them harm or offend them? I don't want to offend the fairy, because things will go bad, right? I remember, Teresa, sweetie, I remember you talking about a long time ago when you trying to find a parking spot, what you'd say when you were trying to find a parking spot, and whenever you did that, a parking spot would mysteriously appear just for you at the right time.
And what did I use? I used to use a chocolate bar, and I'd go spot, find me a spot, and I'd toss out a Turkish Delight, no less, one of my favorite chocolate bars, and it would work every time.
Yep.
Like a charm.
Yeah. So I mean, that's an example.
That.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. And but the thing is, you're calling on Spot, who's whatever fairy that is, or spirit that is. Here's an offering of sweets. Go to it. I'm giving you this. You get me a parking spot, and it worked, right?
Absolutely. I found the parking spot. They'd get the chocolate bar.
That's right.
Yeah.
It worked.
So I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna quickly go through some of the questions. I'm wondering if there's a connection to Iami. It's from Yanifai Fakemi Aisha Awubile Aburuboye. Definitely with Wicca, many of the things that are being discussed, there's definitely a lot of similar commonalities.
Absolutely.
What we would call Wicca and what we would call Karen and Teresa would be Iami Aye. They're Iami, mothers of the earth, as opposed to Iami Oru, which are the original, the actual spiritual witches. The witches which are the ones who are custodian of all of creation and of Olodumare. Ken Allen says, okay, so do you rely on personal gnosis and revelation from the deity through a type of mediumship?
Yes. That's part of our spiritual path, is connecting with deity, so that we can
and
do their work.
To us.
Yeah, they speak to us.
Okay, next
And
one is
I'll give you an example. Now this has happened a long time ago, even before I was initiated, and it was a very powerful experience for me. I was still involved with the Wiccan Church of Canada, and it was the Sunday before Beltane, and it was like I remember this so clearly. It was the Sunday before Beltane, and it was the full moon, and the moon was like 3 days before full, and the sky was clear, and it was a beautiful evening out, and I was like going, and went for a walk, and I just felt I had to go for a walk in a particular direction. I don't know why that was, but I just felt that way. So I went for a walk in this particular area that I've never seen before, and I kid you not, I can hear voices and rustling in the bush beside me as I walked. Oh no, we're not ready for her. What are we gonna do? I don't know. What are we gonna do? She's walking this way. And these are voices that I'm not hearing with my ears. I'm hearing in my head. And I'm like,
Right.
This is just freaking weird. But I keep walking because I don't know, like, am I going crazy or whatever? So I keep walking. And right in front of me, I see the moon. She's right above me, beautiful and white. And in my head, clear, as loud as a church bell in my head, I hear her voice say, go back. They're not ready for you. Come later with friends. And I did. And I was just like, okay, I'm just going to turn around and go back. And, I did the Sunday circle with the WCC, and I grabbed my husband and a couple of friends, and we said, okay, we're going to go over here and look, there's this weird path I've never saw before. Okay, let's go up this path. Mm-hmm. And up there, I kid you not, we saw fairy rings, and we decided to stand like visual, like energetic fairy rings on the ground and a mist around things. No, there was no other mist in the park, just in this particular spot. And when we go, okay, let's stand here and hold hands and see what happens. Well, at that point, all fairy hell breaks loose. And they're zipping around us, and we're like going, crap. And I'm like going, well, let's just keep holding hands and don't let go. Oh. And we're just watching this going, and they're zipping underneath our arms and twirling around and going on. And then all of a sudden I feel a strong tap, tap, tap on my back. And I'm like going, there's nobody. I know physically there's nobody there. I was like, I'm not feeling this. This is not real. And then all of a sudden, I kid you know, I feel this hand grab my back, like the side of my back, and pull really hard. And I turned around, and I went, and I see, I guess, the queen of the fairies of that particular area. And she goes, "You're it." And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about, but we're just going to stand here and hold hands, and and she goes off. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. And the next day, I had a massive bruise on my back.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember, Karen, speaking of, I remember going with you and a few of us going to a specific park with fairy rings and having an experience with them myself. And seeing.
Oh, yeah, I remember Do you remember the sound of the drums? And we tried to follow the drums?
Yes, and we kept thinking there were people drumming in the park, and it was late at night. And every time we'd go there, there's nothing there. And we'd end up going somewhere else, and we're like, okay, now we're really being played with here, right?
Yeah, but we got pulled all over the park, and then finally, we said, "Screw this," and we're like,
that night, and all of us got pulled into different directions, and I went, "Oh, now this is not good. Okay, this is what they intended to do, right?"
Yeah.
And we quickly regrouped because we understood what the hell was going on that night.
And we laughed.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, we laughed, and there was no drumming. There were no other people in that park at that time of night.
Us. I remember that very, very clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, bizarre. So Inifa is asking, are the Druids a branch of Wiccan, or are they a different lineage?
So
Go ahead, Karen.
okay, so Druids were the priestly caste of the Celts. They were mostly decimated by the Roman invasion in the late 70s. Sorry, not 1970s, but I think it was 79 CE. And so they were kind of more or less, so by the Romans, when they attacked when they attacked. And so are there Druids descendant from that? Not sure. I doubt it. I seriously doubt it. That being said, in the 1800s, during the revival of spiritualism and earth-based religions and stuff, there were people who kind of reconstructed what they believed to be Druidism, and it eventually and they created and set up Eistefoths all over the place. Those are stone circles for them to practice worship in. They became the Order of Ovates, Bards, and Druids in the UK, and they've been running now for over 100 years. So they're completely separate. They have no basis whatsoever on Wicca or the like. Now, in North America, there are Druids here in North America that were founded by a group of people who were pagans and maybe witches as well, but wanted to be more of a Druidic reconstruction. And so they created what's called the ADF. And predominantly those people who are considered Druids are either members of the ADF or OBOD or both. And they're completely separate and distinct from Wicca and witchcraft, but they still fall under the umbrella of paganism. So they're just a different different skeletal structure of that umbrella, just like Wicca is. They're just a different one, just like heathenry is, but it's all pagan. But they're not. They're very different, and their ceremonies are very different. They're very beautiful. They
have a lot more Christian influence too.
I'm not sure about that. I can't talk to that. To that, you'd have to talk to a group.
Came into contact.
If you were to talk, I know a couple of people who are Druids here in Southern Ontario, and if you wanted to interview one of them for your show, I could talk to her and get her to contact you. But I really can't say too much in regards to Druidry, because that's not my thing.
Right. But it's good, because I think a lot of people like Yanifa, when they think of Wicca and all that, they because of the location, locality, they group them together, right? So they believe that maybe some aspects of Druidry have been preserved or reborn in Wicca, right? So it's good to know that there's a really separate area.
Definitely.
They're different. It's different. Very different. Yeah.
So Ken Allen says we have the same thing in the Muskogee traditions. First Nations, Fae are the little people.
Yes.
We acknowledge them, definitely. Of course. We all, I acknowledge them in my own backyard. Definitely.
Yeah.
And then my daughter had an experience with them. Fairies are real. And then she said, yes, same as my daughter. She woke up with a bruise on her back. Oh my gosh.
Yep. And if they start getting, and the thing is with the fairies, if you don't listen to them, they'll ramp up their mischievousness. So that's the thing. You have to listen to them. When they want to tell you something, you better listen. Otherwise, you're going to start missing things throughout the house. You're going to start forgetting things. Your car might not start one day. You'll go, why aren't the lights coming on? And you'll find that the breakers was thrown or something like that. Or your favorite knife or something might disappear because they've taken it away or whatever. You might, some of the things is like, why am I getting more knots in my hair while I'm sleeping? That's a common thing that fairies do. They will make more knots in your hair. If you have if you have shoes that have shoelaces, you might be going like, I came home and then I went to put my shoes on the next day. Why are my shoelaces tied? Yeah, in a giant knot and things like that. It means that if they're doing these sorts of things, they have a message for you and you're just not listening.
And you need to pay attention. You have to give them offerings. That's what I know.
Yep.
That's what I have.
Yep. Yeah, and we give offerings almost every night, and that seems to work.
Yeah, and for Yennefer's benefit, the only Odu I know specifically talks about fairies is the Odu Otura Otrupon. So Otura Otrupon talks about fairy, and I know that Odu very well. So, but that's a story for another show. Well, Karen, I think we're at the 2 hour and 24 mark.
Yeah,
I think we're gonna the show has been so interesting. We've covered a lot of very good material.
Yes, we have.
I'm putting up how people can contact you. While I'm doing that, and also I'm going to put up your book and on Amazon, the Chosen Chronicles. Is there any quote? And as a spider is walking on my wall.
And, nice.
Yeah, me. So my question is, we usually, as part of our show, ask our guests to say a quote, something which basically sums up their view of life, their view of their spiritual practice,
your belief system, or words you live by, Karen.
Words that I live by. I'm going to have to paraphrase it because I don't remember the exact words of this quote, but it's from Kung Fu Panda, and
I love it.
And love it. And it's when Grandmaster Mogwai is talking to Po, and he basically says to Po, the past is history, the future is a mystery, and today is a gift, and that is why it's called a present.
Very good. Very nice.
Cute.
Very nice. I love it.
Very cute. I love it. I think that's really, really nice. Thank you, Karen. Now, Karen, I wanted to also mention, we've talked about this, the pagan pub moot. Now, this is something that, our coven way back had actually started, and it had taken off on a life of its own throughout North America because of the pagan pub moot. So I want you to plug the pagan pub moot and how people can get in touch and where to go, especially during these times. Okay. Where does it normally take place, and now what is happening currently because of COVID?
Okay, so the Toronto Pagan Pub Moot meets the third calendar Monday of every month from 7 o'clock in the evening to 11 o'clock at night. For the last decade or so, we have been meeting at the Midtown Gastro Hub, which is at 1535 Yonge Street on their second floor party room. During the summer, they give us their second floor patio, but due to COVID, we haven't been able to meet there. And for the last from April, May, and June, we did Zoom meetings. I hate Zoom meetings. And
I attended a couple of those.
So we did them. They're okay, but then this past Monday we just did a one at the High Park, and we're going to be doing it again next month. Again at High Park, near the concession stand, near the kids park, the kids area, not where the castle is, but off of the main entrance off of Bloor. We're hoping to do that again, rain or shine, because there's there's a covered picnic area there too we can hide at. And hopefully by September we'll be back at the pub. If people
Where's
want
the pub?
It's on Yonge Street, just north of St. Clair. So it's
Right,
accessible
Young and
by
St. Clair.
CTC,
That's right.
and there's parking, and there's free parking at the church right across the street from us.
Right.
So we're hoping to be back there in September. Fingers crossed, depending on if people are going to continue social distancing and wearing their masks so that Ontario and specifically Toronto rates can keep going down. So people be smart, stay safe, wear that damn mask. So we're hoping to be there again, and hopefully we'll be back at the Midtown come September or even October, because it's a great place for people to connect. This past Monday, we had this new girl show up. She was a very sweet young lady, and it was a perfect. She was telling us what her interests were, and that's how I contacted Jean Jerome to help her with her path, because she's interested in Ifa and the African religions. Nice. So it's the pub moot is just pub moots are purely social events.
Right.
But they're also a great way to network, to find out what's going on in the greater pagan communities. They are also a great place to make new friends, find groups to study with, to find teachers to study with, and just hang out and have wonderful meals with, or just hang out with people who are of a like spirit, which is great. And yeah, so without having to go, oh, I have to go through this ritual before I can go and participate. So this is just a purely social thing. And it's been successful for almost 25 years.
And I hope with God's favor to be able to attend next time you have it.
Yeah, so, I'm hoping so too, Jean Jerome. That would be awesome.
So, yeah, absolutely. No, and thank you, Karen, for
thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful. So
thank you. It was nice to reconnect and talk and chat and get corrected on things and whatever.
And this is why we do it. Again, for everybody, I say this almost every show. Again, one of our main missions with this podcast, with this live on Facebook, is to showcase and to give an opportunity for different belief systems, ancestral belief systems, to talk about their story, to talk about their practice, to talk about their contributions to society and to community, and so that practitioners, no matter what belief system you follow, that you do not feel isolated, extricated, in danger, that you feel that you're not alone. In other words, that there's a sense of community, and there are others out there that we have your back. So we're trying to get the word out that for people to know that they're connected, that all these belief systems deserve the same and should enjoy the same respect as any of the other monotheistic belief systems, whether it be Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. As we respect them, so should they respect all our belief systems, right? Because respect is the fundamental aspect of peace, right?
Yes.
Without respect, there is no peace, right? So,
no, absolutely.
I thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Carol says, "Amen, baby," and Jay says, "Thank you, Jean, Teresa, and Karen." And I cannot adjourn this show without giving a special acknowledgement to one of our newest and most loyal viewers, which I'm going to, I have to basically showcase them. If give me 2 seconds, because this is like, I can't end the show without this. This is one of our most faithful viewers. So stand by, and I'm just gonna start doing this every once in a while based on permission. But in this case, I think I have permission to showcase this one.
Yes, I love this one.
Let me make sure I get the right one here. This is one of our most loyal viewers, Mojo.
Yay, Mojo!
Mojo the kitty. He belongs to Beth, and he tunes in every time our show comes on.
Every time our show comes on, Beth is at her cottage up north, and it's one of those beautiful things that for whatever reason, apparently Beth hasn't indicated that he has an aptitude to really pay attention to a computer screen. Otherwise, but this is the second time that we have our show that this kitten is basically just stuck at the screen watching. So we you gotta love it, right?
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Mojo, for tuning in.
and I said
Mojo!
just this is an IFA analogy. Within IFA, there are there's two primary orders where it talks about awo or logbo. Awo or logbo is when the cat was a babalao. And that was it is a metaphor where the cat was actually initiated to Ifa. Or one ring May, Wani May, and Okanaika. So I told Beth that's my future godson. My first award.
I love it.
He deserves it. He deserves it.
So cute. I love it. Look at him. Honest to God, he is. Yay, Mojo. Here, kitty, 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 kitty. And that was for the benefit of Mojo, our loyal listener. All right. Awesome.
Just to show that our show is not just from different nationalities or belief system, but even different species.
Or humans. Karen, yes. I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. I had a very good time. I'm sure our listeners have. And I want to say thank you to all. Beth says, go Mojo. Go Mojo. Go Mojo.
Oh
Get your mojo running. Isn't there a song? We got to play it another time. I love it. Okay. I think it's great. It's so cute.
Now off running circles with his sister. There you go.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well, Karen, thank you very much. It's been a very amazing show. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great. If you ever want me back, I'd be happy to come back.
Yeah, you are always welcome. I consider you now my sister and
family.
Part of the family.
We're family, Karen.
And a big hug from myself, and many blessings to you, your family, and to your coven.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Yes. Have a safe weekend, everybody, and take care. Stay healthy. Wear a mask.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you next Friday. All right?
All right.
Take care, everybody. And hold on, Jay says.
And Jay is saying, is Mojo your new mascot? He said, well, we're definitely thinking about making him an honorary.
I think that's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so. We're going to have to ask permission from his mom. Okay.
That's right.
Yeah, instead of the spider, put a picture of Mojo up.
That's right. That's right. So I say Odabo, good evening, and for our special guest Mojo, meow meow, meow meow,
yeah. meow meow, Mojo,
psychic scritchies.
Okay.
Psychic scritchies.
Okay, bye bye everybody.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
All right, take care.